Division 1042. Chief, we have we have fire into the hallway on the floor above. You need a line upstairs. No water. Mayday. Let it do 7, mayday.
The classification of the New York City Fire Department is considered open and physical, that is both living and man-made. The system boundary diagram. The system boundary diagram consists of inputs, outputs, internal feedback, external feedback, and subsystems. One input for the FDNY system could be the initial call to 911 when reporting an emergency. Subsystems are categorized based on actions by personnel, which are denoted by the light blue boxes, and they have correlated equipment or technology, which are denoted by the dark blue boxes, and they follow a strict flow of movement from one subsystem to the next. Internal feedback can serve as more inputs into the system that do not require an active subsystem to operate, such as standard procedures and implied tasks, which can include maintenance or cleaning trucks. External feedbacks are put back into the system based on outside forces, which can include bystanders' reactions, counselings, and the City of New York reports.
Get a rope to the roof. Get a 35 in the rear, 35 in the rear. Rope on the roof, 35 in the rear. The guy wants the division. You get that? We need a rope on the roof. Top floor, we're losing the top floor, Patty.
The systemogram. The purpose of the systemogram is to follow the actions or lack of actions to make the system function. For instance, with the FDNY system, dispatch will receive a call reporting an emergency, which could lead to the dispatcher giving verbal directions solving the problem and therefore not needing any units or sending a unit if necessary. If a unit is to arrive and they can handle the scene, they will act within the bounds of their operating procedures. In the case of a fire, they will only enter the building once it has been evaluated as safe to do so. If they find victims, the firefighters will lead or carry them out to safety, and if not, they will clear the building and leave themselves, conducting accountability of equipment and personnel. Throughout the call, firefighters will radio call a report of updates to ensure all are aware of a rapidly changing scene. Structure and visibility. The system is known as a gray box since the average person is aware of the actions by FDNY by observation, but they do not understand the intricate system such as its radio protocols, standard procedures, or demands of the job. Spatial arrangement. The spatial arrangement allows for you to see the relationships between levels of a system. With respect to FDNY, the meta system of public safety of the City of New York has two systems, which are FDNY and NYPD. Within the system of FDNY, there are multiple subsystems which can include administrators, emergency medical services, firefighters, and dispatchers. Lastly, we can look at elements of the subsystems, which for a firefighter can include the protective fire uniform and oxygen.
Mayday, 5-6, stand down, fellas. Firemen down in the rear. 2 firemen down in the rear. 2 firemen down in the rear. Let's go. We got 75. Put your pumps in your. Mayday, 2 firemen from the top floor in the rear. We need them.
Evolution. Firefighting as a whole has evolved tremendously in America. Throughout the colonial era, 8 men would work in shifts to monitor the surrounding area, which were called wardens during the day and prowlers at night. Their means of firefighting consisted of observing an emergency on a patrol and creating an assembly line from the well to the scene and past buckets full of water. When entire communities helped, they were called bucket brigades, and they first became an organized force in 1898 under John Scannell, who was the first commissioner of New York Fire Department. The early 1900s consisted of paid firefighters replacing the once entirely volunteer system. Incredible innovations swept through the 1900s, such as carriages filled with water tanks as pictured. 2001 brought the most catastrophic event faced by FDNY. Although the system had developed incredibly by this point, holes were clearly seen in the system, namely communications between firefighters, fire officers, dispatchers, NYPD, and many others. This led to the U.S. Homeland Security to institute the National Incident Management System in 2004, focusing on reactionary organization and management. The national system fully developed in New York in 2006 with upgrades for emergency medical dispatch under the communications of FDNY. It includes the FDOC to monitor major calls on site for contacting other resources via radios and cell phones. New York has been considered vulnerable to threats, especially in this age of terror. Since the FDOC has been implemented, it is easy to see an expansion of that network to include the National Guard and military. For everyday calls, the future hopefully brings more bystander interventions for cases involving CPR or non-urgent emergencies to increase the victim's chances of survival.
Show the metro up. We got a whole company in the rear. They had it. Two ways now. You got 6 guys out. And if you don't show, you got it.
The system's life cycle. The system's life cycle begins with an established need. In this case, the need for fire departments is to save civilians from dying in fires, car collisions, and buildings collapsing. The second stage is to develop a system concept, which is as simple as a unit trained to put out fires and rescue people. In the early days of FDNY, the risk was programmatic because fire departments were typically not successful in saving lives. The third stage is design and developing the system, which can include developments made on the system, such as the idea of the FDNY network across bureaus and a hierarchy of personnel to each have designated tasks and optimize efficiency. The risk involved in this stage is scheduling and maintaining a timeline for the network to build. The fourth stage is to produce the system, and it entails training personnel on national, state, and local procedures and equipment. This stage can also have a scheduling risk due to the time it takes to create, implement, and train personnel. The fifth stage is deploying the system, which is to include all personnel and equipment are up to date. The risk could be technological, with equipment getting outdated, such as the horse-drawn carriage of water tanks in the 1900s. Currently, the Fire Department of New York is in the operation stage of the system, which is the sixth stage. They're constantly reevaluating the weaknesses of the system, such as communications as seen in 2001. The risk they are facing now is technology due to precautions getting outdated. The seventh stage of the system's life cycle has not yet been reached, which is system retirement. Within the system, different stakeholders emerge at different points. Initial stakeholders include civilians and government officials, as there is not yet a system in place for others to be affected. The subsequent stages each have firefighters and fire officials and fluctuate between civilians and government officials until the system is in operation. At this point, stakeholders extend to include NYPD. Ethical considerations must be made to include the investment firefighters and responders have in their calls. Since they are consumed in saving the victims' lives, it is far too easy to take on unnecessary risk.
Kevin, the whole company just shoots out the rear cases. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Who jumped in the rear? We need massive EMS here. Massive injuries. 10-4, I've already notified EMS. They're calling a bunch of buses, Kate. 7-1-7, how are we making out with that line now?